I would like to introduce more about the National Culture Policy, why the implemented of the National Culture Policy. Okay, the National Culture Policy is defined as the overall culture of human life. Culture is important in the process of national development because Malaysia's personality must be nurtured through effort to enhance socio-economic and political development. It requires the cooperation and involvement of all segments of society, such as Malaysia is a multi-ethnic country. Therefore, the process of national culture must be meticulously planned in order to create a harmonious and prosperous way of life. This has been a serious concern since the beginning of the country founding, where the impact of ethnic unrest can be traced back to the event in 13 May 1969, which led to civil unrest in Malaysia. This event became the bloodless episode in the country. The history of our country, which that led to the death and destruction of property. In the aftermath of the tragedy, the government has established a national order and implemented certain policy to unite all race, including the establishment of a national culture policy. Okay, the National Culture Policy was introduced in 1971 in Malaysia. This policy is established as a guide in shaping, establishing, and preserving national identity. Policy formulation must consider the fact of regional history and national development. For example, such as the country as a meeting point, a trade center, and a civilization center. Our country has been such a center for the past 2000 years. Therefore, as another continuous process, the existence of the national culture policy, Malaysia will continue through three principles set by the government as the basic of the national culture. That is, the national culture must be based on the culture of the people in the region. Okay, in Malaysia, Melaka is a center of radiation, the development of Malay culture and heritage since age, and is characterized by glory and majesty of Malay civilization that use the Malay language as the language of the communication. And the regional culture is described with the use of the Malay language as the fundamental characterized to more than 200 million human beings who use the same language like we all. Okay, and the next principle is suitable element from other country may be accepted as part of the national culture. In this principle is in line with the situation of multiracial people who inherit many cultures, such as Malaysia. Therefore, element of Chinese, Indian, and other appropriate culture must be considered and accepted. Okay, and the third principle is Islam is an important component in the formulation of the national culture. That is, religion or belief in God is essential element in the process of a country as well as in the personal development of its people. Islam guides the community in balancing and unifying effort to meet their emotional and physical needs and should be therefore be an important element in shaping the national culture in view of its status as the official religion of the country, as well as the existence of Islamic historical fact and values supported by most people in the region.
Assalamualaikum. Today I want to explain about problem of national culture policy. The problem that first made the government implementation the national culture policy it is basically caused from the multiracial society in our country. It is one main factor that we cannot doubt because when in our country that live in various of nations like Malaysia, they have three main nations such as Malay, Chinese and India and also Sabah and Sarawak. It is very influential a factor that causes multiracial society. Firstly, issue that involve a multiracial society that cause problem of national culture policy. It is different type of religion and custom that ultimately when every nation has their own religion and custom, such as respective religion and belief in our country, it is Malay practice the Islamic faith, another faith popular among the Chinese and India it is Buddha and Hindu. When they practice in different religion, they look down on each other because they think their beliefs are right. It is undeniably that in a community that has different ethnic groups in every aspect regardless of religion and culture, or there are made then least to recognize to each other and cause prejudice that hindered good relation between the race. Secondly, it is different of politics based on their race and this is ultimately when they are culturally and religiously different which will cause them to disagree on the political point of view as well. Why they prefer the different political because they think political oriented individually racist because they want to treat their race and their nation to support their own racist party such as a part of our country, a part of our nation in our country like Malay choose Malay Islamic Party, China is choosing Action Democratic Party and India is choosing Congress India Malaysia. There's no of our nation like to choose their own party, but when a part of us to choose their own party, it is cause them to disregard the importance of their national identity by fighting for the interests of their people. It is also a problem of racial strife by cause misunderstanding between us all as a community that and the relationship between people in Malaysia to criticism of racial sensibility. The party political that based on three also is main factor that make a sensitive issue racist that involve on their own culture, economy and the right of privilege by the political party. It is playing main factor in unify and unify the nation and shaping the race. And lastly point, it is different of language. It is main problem that make a multiracial society because when in one community that has different nation, it can make every race use their own language. We know that the language is very important symbol to every nation. This is why they maintain their own language, but in community, when language use is different, is greatly affect our country in maintain the list just as in our country, every nation like Malay, Chinese and India use the old language. Even for the new generation, they also taught to speak their old language to formal and informal teens when parents send their children to special schools of different nationality that makes them unable to recognize each other. When they speak in different languages, it also causes a misunderstanding in our races and nation, and it also causes we cannot maintain a harmony and peace in our country because this has led to misunderstanding between the nation. Even our country does not prohibit the use of different language, but when they all make their language as an official language, in Malaysia it is very wrong. Because in the constitution, the Malay language is the official language in our country. That's all for the problem of national culture policy. Thank you.
In this video, I would like to talk about the main objective and goal of the policy. Firstly, it is about to strengthen national unity through culture. In Malaysia, there are three types of ethnic groups, which are Malay, Chinese, and Indian, plus other several indigenous tribes. To strengthen this national unity through culture, the Malaysian government can promote national unity through campaigns like open house, one Malaysian concept, and advertisement. Open houses usually held during the major festival within the country. So the common open house is during Eid, Diwali, Chinese New Year, Christmas, Mid-Autumn Festival, and others. The second one is about to foster and preserve the national identity that created through national culture. This national identity could be a person's identity or information that belonging to a state or a nation. Okay, the citizen must have well educated in their life because it is important of education that can deliberately try to construct kinsmen who will participate in society as productive citizens. This education is key to the inculcation of values and ethics which ultimately shape the nation's character, growth, and social cohesion. The third one is about to enrich and enhance the quality of human life in equilibrium with socio-economic development. It is about to expand to public concerns in developing social policy and economic initiatives. The target is to bring improvement in the well-being of the individual, groups, family, community, and society. The government must keep improving the quality standard of people's material and cultural life. This objective is about to use the national cultural policy as guidelines in designing, formulating, and sustaining the national identity of Malaysia in the world. Malaysia could be a federal constitution monarch that located within the heart of Southeast Asia. During the 18th century, Malaysia became the topic of the British Empire and achieved the independence in 1957. The ruling party decided to form Bahasa Malay because the main medium of instruction in our country after Malaysia's independence. Therefore, this will promote the national unity and remain the Malaysian identity.
Next, I will tell you about the actor in creating of this policy. The actor is play an important role in the implementation of policy. For this policy, Ministry of Culture and Art take the role in implementation for this policy goals and strategy. Among other things, the ministry is overseen to research, development and promotion, education and art development, and link to national culture progress. And all these efforts have been achieved through development activities, art performance by National Culture Complex as a organizer and secretariat. Besides that, the Ministry of Culture, Arts and Tourism and the involvement from other is also important in the implementation of this policy, such as ministry and departments of federal governments and state government, statutory and others. Next is the role of private sector and cultural organization is increasingly need as these bodies can play a role in carrying out culture development and development effort at their respective organization, and thus funding sponsorship of culture program or project.
Okay. Hi, Assalamualaikum. My name is Nursyahida binti Muhammad SHAHROL, and I'm going to explain about the implementation and the strategy of national cultural policy. So basically, the implementation involve restrict inclusion into the national process for group. Also advocacy for a balanced cultural understanding that be enhanced. For example, they will encourage the process of updating culture specific updating culture for the specific group or legislation, and also for the other legislation. So there is a few strategy that they had done. The firstly is culture findings and also the financing system. The ministry must strive to sustain the income from the national profit at this point of level to form sure the cultural support, such as fund are distributed in a compliance the law effective to the act and culture benefit. Also the bills that must exit in the legislative spending. The next one is consolidating knowledge base and impact of cultural policy. Okay, so indicators and review will be produced to explain the effect of the cultural policy itself, like in information-based steering strategy, sector, and also the other network that should be increased effectively. They are also include the culture administration. Ministry of Education shall explain the framework and activities in different sectors and shall decide which administration roles should be assigned to other authorities in expert, like Culture Commission. It is expected to become an art and culture policy development hub. Okay. The next one, they will measure that they be take in the audiovisual field so that it can coordinate the function of the National Audiovisual Archive to increase their role in media education in terms of the research and development. And lastly, they will improve conditions for artistic work and also production. Like they are making a scheme or grant and also subsidies for artists and also for the other creative work that to strengthen the view of general income for them to grow their income, and also social protection also in terms of tax. So basically this national cultural policy implementation and strategy, the implementation.
Okay, so next is evaluation on the effectiveness of National Cultural Policy (NCP). As what ROHMANI has already mentioned earlier, the main goals and the objective of NCP. Now, I have already evaluated the NCP. Either it achieved the goals that have been set before implementing this policy or not. and based on my research, the NCP effectively achieved the goals. The first evaluation of the effectiveness of national cultural policy is multiracial, language and religion in Malaysia. As a citizen of Malaysia, we know that Malaysia is a multiracial and religious. In Malaysia, for example, we have Malay, Chinese, Indian and Bumiputra Sabah and Sarawak. In order to improve socio-economic and political development, Tun Dr. Mahathir, the fourth Prime Minister, introduced the NCP, National Cultural Policy, in 1971. This outline or guideline good for enhancing national identity as a citizen of Malaysia. This policy is effective against people of various religions and races itself. As we know, Malaysia has many races and religions. We can still live with people of different religions and races. We can speak the same language to each other. As Malaysian, we can also accept other people's language and dialects. And then second, national cultural policy helps to enhance and emphasize national identity and unity. In Malaysia, as I mentioned earlier, we live in a country that has various races and religions. So often, happening issues that related the citizens are not being treated fairly. Some of them say that they are not being treated the same way as Malay citizens by the ruling government. For instance, they always mention the Malay citizen always gain benefits rather than other races. But actually, we are all gaining the same benefits provided by the ruling government. As we live in the same country, we are all under the same government. The government is responsible for all of us. The government provide the same services. So the national cultural policy implemented with a view to stress, enhance and maintain harmony among the unity so that we can live in harmony country and we can avoid racism. Thirdly, NCP helps to cope with the dissatisfaction issues. We know that Malay citizens as the indigenous ethnic that form of majority Malay community. Because of that, Malay was chosen as the backbone of Malaysia nation building. And during the establishment of the Malaysian Constitution, contents of these Malay rights content were enacted. Okay, so the contents of rights of Malaysia. Firstly, the rights of the Malays. The rights of the Malays came ground with the authorization by the state, as the opening of the land is under the control of state regulated. State government can open a special and for Malays without any conditions. Second, position in government. Senior position in the government of the Federation of Malaysia must be allocated in a specific ratio to the Malay and non-Malay. Thirdly, scholarship provisions. Provision of scholarships or grants more for the Malay students from non-Malay students. Fourthly, economic assistance. Regulation shall be made to enable the Malays to get license or authorizations to enable them to carry out certain corporate activities and other economic activities. Okay, that is why it has caused dissatisfaction between non-Malay. The NCP therefore helps to address the issues of dissatisfaction between the citizen of Malay and non-Malay, even though Malay citizen has their own rights in constitutions. And then the last one is the immigrants' traditions were not sidelined. Every race of ethnicity in Malaysia has its own traditions, not only tradition of Malay. For example, Malay people celebrating Ramadan, Eid Aidilfitri and Eid Aidil-Adha and others. Other races can also celebrate their traditions, and this policy has stated that every race is given the freedom to practice and celebrate their traditions. Chinese people can celebrate their Chinese New Year, and same goes for every races in Malaysia.
Weakness is about racial problems will persist because the ethnic groups still care about their customs, culture, and rights. There will always be a preference for some to be among their kind, the language, the right, the reflection of their identity and worship in their most temples or church. However, Malaysians should be one nation for all people living in our country. The citizen must know that a strong unity is important because Malaysian society must be treated equally. They need to think and act accordingly. The racism between citizens will give effects to the national culture policy. For example, racism that happened in Malaysia that caused conflict and war was the tragedy that happened on May during the year 1969 in Malaysia. The problem is mainly due to racial politics, which also related to racism. Next is about national language issue. According to Guai Tak Chong, 2013, the language of nationality can be defined as a language that become a symbol of the national identity of a nation or state that is uniquely normally used for the passage of political and law. Bahasa kebangsaan or bahasa nasional is the main medium language to communicate in Malaysia. It is a common communication and a national identity that shared by all people. Unfortunately, there are some people in this country who struggle with their native language, such as Mandarin language, Tamil language, and others. Although they are Malaysian, but they feel that they need to respect their mother tongue as well. This will lead to effort to establish a national language as a national identity is in danger. Lastly, the racial support on the social group that exists in Malaysia. This weakness of the national culture policy as envisaged within the National Transformation 2050. It refers to the state of the social group that advocates for the rights and ideologies of their people. The respective ethnic groups have made the structure of the social group become more difficult to form a united spirit among the people in Malaysia. This is often because most of the present politics as seen are more inclined to fight for the rights and privilege of their respective ethnic groups. This racist politics is extremely dangerous within the quest of the unity, as racially based parties will fight for the interests of the people only. Firstly, the strength of the policy is the restriction of freedom in art. As we know, art can influence society by changing their opinions, instilling values, and translating the experience across space and time. Moreover, art also can give voice to the politically or socially disenfranchised. It is because art should not bothering people, hurting their sentiments, stirring up a nuisance and others. It is important to maintain harmony without compromising the will of the people. Malaysia must control their sentiments and be tolerant of living a harmonious and united life without touching the sensitive of others. Cultural heritage may be a physical of artifacts and intangible, the attributes of a giggle or society that is inherited from the past generations. It gives rather more benefit to society and helps the current generations to be told any success and mistakes that the sooner generations did as a guide or make it more better. Many actions that the government and society can do to push the culture of Malaysia. In an example, people in Malaysia must be friendly, helpful, and polite because it will provide a good impression to tourists once they set their foot for a vacation in our country. Next, Malaysia must provide good service and hospitality like transport, accommodation, and other to the visitors traveling to the current country. Lastly, strengthen the bond of relations between ethnic groups. Malaysia may be a typical multiracial and multi-religious country. The ethnic groups of Malaysia consist mainly of the Malay community, the Chinese community, and therefore the Indian community, within the effort to form a Malaysia race that more resilient in overcoming every kind of challenges that caused by globalization, including socialistic, economical, and political. The past Prime Minister of Malaysia, Datuk Seri Muhammad Najib Tun Abdul Razak, has introduced the concept of One Malaysia. It supported the principle of People First performance now. Okay, this idea is to meet the aspirations of Malaysians in line with the allocation and shrine within the federal constitution and national principles. The Malaysian concept seeks to strengthen the relationships and cooperation among the multi-ethnic people during this country because the main instrument to the varied threats and challenges that aim to threaten and disrupt the sanctity of their
Conclusion of the national culture policy, basically we can say that it was implemented and established to control the issue of the multiracial society that happen in our society. It also played the important role that have responsibility to unity every nation in our country, such as Malay, Chinese, India, and also Sabah Sarawak, to live in one community. And it also preserves the national identity that creates through the national culture by make sure the objectives this policy can be achieved and this policy can go on well. To make sure this policy can be achieved, there are actors that hold a big responsibility in implementation this policy, such as Ministry of Culture and Art, that make sure this policy work in line with what the government want in resolving the problem of multiracial society in our country. And this policy also have various of strategy that help the Ministry of Culture and Art to make sure this policy implementation in effectiveness, such as consolidated the knowledge base and impact of cultural policy and improve the condition for artistic work and production. What we can say, the effect from implementation this policy that has good impact to our country, such as strengthening the bond of relation between ethnic group and to make sure every race live in one community. It is very difficult because it also have the challenges that make this policy difficult to implement because from the issue of multiracial society such as different of culture, religion, caste, language and politics that cause a weakness of implementation this policy. Even this policy give a effectiveness to us, but we also can improve and fix this weakness by the government play their role, such as government must give for the public to realize how important the national culture policy to us. We encourage the use of the Malay language in our community to enhance understanding between races, and secondly, it is promote activity that include of eh, that include cross-racial activities such as cultural day in order to understand the cultural norm of each race. Thirdly, cultivate and attitude with each race to respect one another through the education system, starting with the younger generation. And lastly, is ensure the rights of all races are protected by ensure that justice is always practiced and avoid misunderstandings between us. What we conclude is this policy has a big important role to our national culture policy to solve a issue multiracial society in our country. And we also as a public must support our government. We give a good cooperation to solve the issue. That's all for conclusion. Thank you.